The year is 878. A king is running for his life. Not retreating, not regrouping, running. Barefoot through freezing marshland, mud swallowing his ankles with every desperate step, while behind him, a Viking army burns everything he has ever known to the ground. His kingdom is gone. His army is scattered. His throne belongs to a foreign enemy now. And the man who was supposed to stop all of this, the man who was crowned king just months ago, is hiding in a swamp, eating stolen fish, and wondering if England will survive the year. It probably shouldn't have. But here is the thing that history remembers, the thing that separates this man from every other defeated king who vanished into obscurity. He didn't stay in that swamp. He didn't give up. He didn't disappear. He turned around. He rebuilt. And when he came back, he didn't just win. He changed the entire course of a nation. His name was Alfred, and he is the only English king who ever earned the title the Great. If you enjoy epic, true history and forgotten kings, subscribe now, because this story changes everything. We're going to follow Alfred from his sickest childhood to his most brilliant victory, from his darkest exile to the birth of a nation. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how a sickly, hunted, nearly destroyed king became the single most important figure in the history of England. Let's begin. Alfred was born around 848 AD in Wantage, in what we now call Oxfordshire. He was the youngest of 5 sons born to King Ethelwulf of Wessex, the royal house of the House of Wessex, which ruled the southern kingdom of Anglo-Saxon England. On paper, Alfred had everything: royal blood, a powerful father, a kingdom that stretched across southern England. But his body told a different story. From his earliest years, Alfred suffered from chronic illness. Medieval sources describe recurring episodes of severe pain, and historians have debated for centuries what exactly ailed him. Some believe he suffered from Crohn's disease. Others have suggested kidney stones, intestinal infections, or a combination of conditions that the medieval world had no name for and no cure to offer. What we do know is this: Alfred spent much of his childhood in pain. There were weeks when he could barely stand, periods when eating was agony, stretches of time when his body simply refused to cooperate with the life his royal station demanded of him. And yet, even as a boy, something in Alfred refused to surrender to his own weakness. At just 5 years old, Alfred was sent to Rome, not as a prisoner, but as a pilgrim. His father sent him to be confirmed by Pope Benedict III, a journey of hundreds of miles across dangerous territory. For a child of 5, this was not a casual trip. It was an odyssey, and Alfred survived it. 2 years later, Alfred made the journey again, this time accompanying his father to Rome the second time. By the time he returned to England, he was 7 years old, and he had already seen more of the world than most men would in a lifetime. Rome had made an impression. The weight of Christianity, the grandeur of the papal court, the idea that faith was not just belief, but a civilizing force. These things settled in Alfred like seeds in firm ground. They would grow for the rest of his life. But England was not a peaceful place to grow up in. Not in the 9th century. The Anglo-Saxon world was divided into several kingdoms. Wessex in the south, Mercia in the Midlands, Northumbria in the north, and East Anglia in the east. These kingdoms bickered. They warred. They competed for dominance over one another for generations. It was a fractured land, a patchwork of rival rulers and shifting alliances, held together not by unity, but by shared language, shared faith, and shared geography, and shared vulnerability, because none of these kingdoms were prepared for what was coming. The Vikings arrived in England in the late 8th century, and When they didn't just raid. They conquered. To understand what the Vikings meant to Anglo-Saxon England, you have to understand what warfare looked like before they arrived. Battles between English kingdoms were terrible, yes, but they followed rules. There were customs, honor codes, and a shared understanding among Saxon warriors about how conflict was conducted. The Vikings had none of those rules. They had no shared history with the Saxons, no shared faith, no shared understanding of boundaries or limits. They came from the sea. They came fast. They came to kill, to burn, and to take. The early raids were horrifying enough. Viking longships appeared on the coasts and rivers of England with almost no warning, and the communities they struck had almost no defense. Monasteries were particularly vulnerable. They were wealthy, filled with gold, silver, and sacred relics, and they were completely undefended. The Vikings sacked monastery after monastery, and the monks who survived wrote about it with a terror that leaps off the page even 1,000 years later. But the raids evolved into something far worse: invasion. In 865 AD, a massive Viking force landed in East Anglia. This was not a raiding party. This was an army. Historians call it the Great Heathen Army, and its size was unprecedented. Modern estimates suggest it numbered in the thousands, a force large enough not just to raid, but to settle, to conquer, and to rule. The Great Heathen Army moved north first, capturing York in 866. Northumbria fell. Then they turned west, and within a few years, Mercia collapsed too. Kingdom after kingdom, the Vikings swept through Anglo-Saxon England like a fire through dry grass. Alfred was a teenager when this began. He watched from the relative safety of Wessex as the kingdoms around him were destroyed one by one. East Anglia, gone. Northumbria, gone. Mercia, shattered. By the time Alfred reached his 20s, Wessex was the last major Anglo-Saxon kingdom still standing. The Vikings hadn't turned their full attention to it yet, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. The psychological weight of this is almost impossible to overstate. Imagine living in a world where every kingdom around you has fallen to a foreign enemy in less than a decade. Imagine knowing that your kingdom is next. Imagine feeling the ground beneath your civilization beginning to crack. Alfred felt all of it, and he was about to feel something worse. Alfred became king in 871 AD, at approximately 23 years old. The circumstances of his coronation were not triumphant. They were desperate. His eldest brother, King Athelred, had been fighting the Vikings for months. The two brothers had led the Saxon forces together, winning some battles, losing others. But Athelred was ill, possibly from the same chronic conditions that plagued Alfred's family. And in the spring of 871, he died. The exact cause is debated. Some sources suggest wounds sustained in battle. Others point to illness. What matters is the result. Alfred, the youngest son, the sickly child who had spent much of his life in pain, was suddenly the king of Wessex. And Wessex was at war. Within the first year of Alfred's reign, he fought the Vikings in at least 5 major engagements, 5 battles in 12 months, against an enemy that had already destroyed every other Saxon kingdom. Some of these battles Alfred won. Others were draws at best. The Vikings were not defeated. They were not driven out. They simply paused, and then they came back stronger. The pressure was immense. Alfred was not just fighting for his own life. He was fighting for the survival of the last independent Saxon kingdom in England. Every decision he made carried the weight of an entire civilization. Every defeat risked not just his throne, but the extinction of Saxon England as a political and cultural entity. He was 23 years old at this moment in the story, exhausted, outnumbered, and carrying the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. Would you have surrendered? Leave your answer in the comments below, because Alfred's answer to that question is about to define the next 1,000 years of English history. In the winter of 878, the Vikings struck again, and this time they struck when no one was ready. The Viking leader Guthrum launched a surprise attack on Wessex during the Christmas period, a time when the Saxon army was dispersed and the kingdom was at its most vulnerable. Alfred was at Chippenham, his winter headquarters, and the attack came so fast and so violently that he barely escaped with his life. He fled south and west, gathering a small band of loyal followers, perhaps a few dozen men at first, then a few hundred. They retreated into the Somerset levels, a vast network of marshland and wetlands in the southwest of England. This was not a strategic withdrawal. This was flight. Alfred had lost almost everything in a single night. The marshes of Athelney became Alfred's refuge. They were remote, difficult to navigate, and largely uninhabitable, which is precisely why the Vikings hadn't occupied them. Alfred and his followers lived in the swamps for weeks, perhaps months, surviving on whatever they could catch or forage. They built a small fortified platform, a lake dwelling, deep in the wetlands, hidden from Viking scouts. It was here, in the darkest period of his life, that one of the most famous legends in English history supposedly took place. The story goes like this. Alfred, disguised as a common peasant, sought shelter with an old woman in a small cottage on the edge of the marshes. She offered him shelter and set him to watch over some cakes, simple flatbreads, cooking on a fire. Alfred, distracted by his plans and worries, let the cakes burn. The woman scolded him harshly, not knowing he was the king. Now, here is where we must be honest with you. This story almost certainly did not happen exactly as told. It first appears in sources written well after Alfred's death, and it has the unmistakable quality of legend, a morality tale designed to illustrate a point about humility, or perhaps about the low point from which Alfred rose. What the story almost certainly does reflect is the genuine reality of Alfred's situation. A king reduced to hiding among peasants, stripped of his kingdom, his army, and his dignity. Whether or not the cakes burned, the truth is this. Alfred of Wessex, king of the last Saxon kingdom in England, was a fugitive in his own land. The Vikings controlled most of the country. His throne was empty. His people believed he might be dead, and yet he was not dead. He was planning. The months Alfred spent in the Somerset marshes were not wasted. They were spent thinking, studying, and preparing. This is one of the most remarkable aspects of Alfred's character, and one that sets him apart from almost every other medieval king. When confronted with defeat, his instinct was not rage, not despair, not blind aggression. It was analysis. He wanted to understand why he had lost. He wanted to understand the enemy he was fighting, and he wanted to find a way to fight them on his own terms. The Vikings were brilliant warriors, but they were also brilliant strategists. They understood logistics, terrain, and the psychology of war. They used speed, striking before defenders could organize. They used surprise, attacking at festivals at dawn, during winter when armies were dispersed. They used the waterways of England to move troops faster than any land force could follow. And they understood fortification. Viking strongholds, called long forts, were designed to be nearly impregnable. Alfred studied all of it. He also studied history, Medieval sources tell us that Alfred was deeply literate, unusual for a Saxon king, and that he spent time reading about the wars and strategies of other rulers. He studied the Romans, who had once built fortified towns across Britain that served as centers of commerce, defense, and governance. He studied the Vikings themselves, trying to understand the logic of their campaigns. What emerged from this period of reflection was not just a military strategy. It was a system, a way of organizing the defense of Wessex that could withstand Viking attacks, not just once, but permanently. But first, he needed an army. And to get an army, he needed to call on the loyalty of a kingdom that had every reason to believe he was already dead. Alfred sent messengers out into the countryside. Word spread through the Somerset marshes and into the Saxon heartlands. The king was alive. The king was gathering his forces. The king was coming back. And remarkably, extraordinarily, men answered the call. Farmers left their fields. Freemen picked up weapons they hadn't touched in months. Lords who had every reason to doubt Alfred's cause made their way to the marshes to join him. Why? Perhaps because Alfred had earned their loyalty in his first difficult year as king. Perhaps because the alternative, total Viking conquest, was unthinkable. Perhaps because something about Alfred's refusal to surrender, even in the darkest hour, inspired a loyalty that transcended politics. By the spring of 878, Alfred had an army again, a real one. The Battle of Edington, fought in May 878, is one of the most consequential battles in English history and one of the least celebrated. Most people have never heard of it, but if Alfred had lost that day, England as we know it might never have existed. Alfred moved his forces out of the marshes and marched east, directly toward the Viking army under Guthrum. The two forces met near Edington in Wiltshire, a location that historians have debated for centuries, though the general area is well established. What followed was not a single dramatic clash, but a sustained engagement that lasted, by some accounts, for 3 days. Alfred had spent the winter reorganizing his forces, drilling them in tactics, and preparing them psychologically for what was coming. He had also, crucially, chosen the ground. He positioned his army in a strong defensive position and forced Guthrum to attack him on terrain that negated the Vikings' traditional advantages of speed and surprise. The Saxons held. Hour after hour, the Vikings struck at Alfred's shield wall, a formation of warriors standing shoulder to shoulder, their shields overlapping to form an almost impenetrable barrier of wood and iron. The Vikings threw everything they had against it, and Alfred's men held firm. And then, at the decisive moment, Alfred ordered an advance. The Saxon shield wall surged forward. The Vikings, exhausted from days of assault, found themselves pushed back. The fighting became brutal, close-quarters combat, exactly the kind of engagement where Saxon determination and Viking fatigue would decide the outcome. The Vikings broke. They fled, pursued by Alfred's forces all the way back to their fortified stronghold at Chippenham. Alfred did not pursue them into the fortification. He had learned from the Vikings. He surrounded the stronghold instead, cutting off all supply lines, and waited. For 14 days, he waited. On the 15th day, Guthrum sent envoys to negotiate. The terms Alfred demanded were extraordinary, not in their cruelty, but in their wisdom. And this is where Alfred's story takes its most surprising and consequential turn. Most medieval kings, when they defeated an enemy this thoroughly, would have demanded total submission. Ransom, tribute, enslavement, destruction. These are the standard responses to victory in the 9th century. The Vikings themselves certainly operated this way. Alfred chose something different. He chose mercy, but not the naive, sentimental mercy of someone who doesn't understand the consequences. This was mercy as strategy, one of the most calculated and brilliant diplomatic moves in medieval history. The Treaty of Wedmore, negotiated in the weeks following Edington, established terms that reshaped the map of England. Guthrum and his Vikings were permitted to keep a large portion of eastern England, a territory that would eventually become known as the Danelaw. In exchange, Guthrum agreed to withdraw from Wessex, to respect Saxon territory, and, most remarkably of all, to convert to Christianity. Was this mercy or the smartest move in medieval history? Think about it and drop your thoughts in the comments, because what Alfred did next reveals exactly how deeply he understood power. The conversion of Guthrum was not simply a religious gesture. It was a political masterstroke. In the 9th century world, Christianity was not just a faith. It was a civilizing framework. It provided shared laws, shared moral codes, shared rituals, and, crucially, shared legitimacy. A Christian king could negotiate treaties. A Christian king could be held to agreements. A Christian king belonged to the same political and moral universe as the other rulers of Europe. By converting Guthrum, Alfred didn't just pacify an enemy, he civilized one. He brought the Viking leader into the same moral and political framework that governed Saxon England. He made Guthrum appear rather than a perpetual outsider. And in doing so, he created the foundation for a lasting peace. Alfred even served as Guthrum's godfather at the baptism. The Viking king who had nearly destroyed Wessex stood in his Saxon church, renouncing his old gods and accepting the faith of his former enemy, with Alfred of Wessex standing beside him as a sponsor. It was, by any measure, one of the most remarkable diplomatic achievements of the medieval world. But Alfred was not finished building. The Battle of Edington had saved Wessex. The Treaty of Wedmore had secured peace. Now Alfred turned his attention to something far more ambitious. He was going to make sure that what happened to him never happened again. The Vikings had taught Alfred a brutal lesson. A kingdom without organized, permanent defenses was a kingdom waiting to be destroyed. The Saxon system of calling up warriors when needed, the FYRD, was simply not fast enough to respond to Viking raids. By the time an army assembled, the Vikings had already struck and vanished. Alfred's solution was revolutionary for Anglo-Saxon England. He built Buzz. What was a fortified town, the settlement surrounded by wooden or stone palisades, designed to house both a garrison and a civilian population. The Buzz were not simply military installations. They were centers of commerce, administration, and governance. They were placed at strategic intervals across Wessex, positioned so that no point in the kingdom was more than a day's march from a fortified position. Any Viking force that attempted to raid would find itself within striking distance of a Saxon garrison that could mobilize quickly and respond with force. Alfred built dozens of Buzz across his kingdom. Some were new constructions, others were expansions of existing settlements. Together, they formed a network, a web of defensive positions that transformed Wessex from a vulnerable patchwork of farmsteads into a kingdom with a permanent, organized military infrastructure. This was not a one-time project. It was a systemic reform. Alfred also reorganized the FYRD itself, creating a rotation system so that half the army could be in the field at any time while the other half maintained the farms and economy. He standardized the military obligations of landowners. He created supply chains to keep the Buzz provisioned. He thought about defense not as a single battle, but as an ongoing system, a machine that could operate continuously year after year, regardless of whether Alfred himself was present to command it. But Alfred's reforms went far beyond military strategy. He also turned his attention to the law. Saxon England had no unified legal code. Each kingdom, each region, each lord had his own customs and traditions, often contradictory and always inconsistent. Alfred commissioned a comprehensive legal code, a written collection of laws that would apply across Wessex. He drew on earlier Saxon codes, on Roman law, and on biblical principles to create a framework of justice that was, for its time, remarkably fair and organized. This legal code did something that military victories alone could never accomplish. It gave the people of Wessex a shared identity, a common set of rules, a sense that they belonged to the same political community governed by the same principles. Alfred was not just defending a kingdom, he was creating one. Of all the things Alfred the Great accomplished, the battles he won, the treaties he negotiated, the fortifications he built, the achievement that may ultimately have mattered most is the one that receives the least attention in popular retellings of the story. Alfred promoted literacy. In 9th century England, the vast majority of people could not read or write. Even among the nobility, literacy was uncommon. The monasteries preserved knowledge, but the Viking invasions had destroyed many of them, and with them, much of the written culture of Anglo-Saxon England. Entire libraries have been burned. Scholars have been killed or scattered. The intellectual heritage of a civilization was disappearing. Alfred saw this as a catastrophe, not just cultural, but political and spiritual. He believed deeply and genuinely that a kingdom that could not read could not govern itself. A people without access to knowledge were a people vulnerable not just to military conquest, but to ignorance itself. So he did something extraordinary. He launched a program of translation and education unlike anything seen in England before or for centuries after. Alfred himself translated books from Latin into Old English. He personally sat down and rendered complex theological and philosophical texts into a language ordinary people could read. He translated works by Augustine of Hippo, the philosopher who had shaped Christian thought for centuries. He translated the history of the world as understood by his era. He translated Boethius, the Roman philosopher who had written about fate, fortune, and the meaning of suffering while awaiting his own execution, a text that must have resonated deeply with a king who had himself come close to total destruction. Alfred also established schools. He brought scholars from across the Christian world, from Wales, from Flanders, from the continent, to his court at Winchester. He wanted to rebuild the intellectual culture of England from the ground up. And he didn't just do this for the nobility. He wanted literacy to spread. He wanted his kingdom to be a place where knowledge was valued, where learning was possible, where the written word was not the exclusive property of monks in isolated monasteries. This was not a vanity project. Alfred understood something that many rulers throughout history have missed. That culture is the deepest form of power. An empire can be conquered by force, but a culture, a shared language, a shared set of stories, a shared way of understanding the world, that is almost impossible to destroy. By promoting literacy and learning, Alfred was building something that no Viking army could burn. He was creating an intellectual and cultural identity for his people that would outlast any military victory. The books Alfred translated are still read today. The educational impulse he sparked contributed, in ways both direct and indirect, to the eventual development of English as a literary language, a language that would one day produce Shakespeare, Newton, and the Declaration of Independence. Alfred the Great did not just save Wessex. He helped create the foundation on which English civilization would eventually be built. The title the Great is not given lightly in history. Very few rulers have ever earned it. Alexander the Great, Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, Alfred the Great. To be placed in that company is to be recognized not simply as a successful king, but as someone who fundamentally transformed the world they inhabited. So why Alfred? Why not his brothers, who also fought the Vikings? Why not Athelred, who preceded him? Why not any of the dozens of Saxon kings who ruled before and after him? The answer lies in the scope of what Alfred accomplished. Other kings won battles. Alfred won battles and built a system that made future victories possible. Other kings defended their territory. Alfred defended his territory and created the political, legal, and cultural infrastructure of a nation. Other kings survived. Alfred survived and used his survival to reshape everything around him. Alfred was the first Saxon king to think beyond his own reign. He built laws that would protect Wessex for generations. He created laws that would govern his kingdom long after he was gone. He promoted education and literacy with a vision that extended far beyond his own lifetime. He was, in a very real sense, thinking about the future, about what England would become, not just what it was. His successors built on his foundation. His grandson, Athelstan, became the first king to rule all of England. Alfred's great-great-grandson, Edgar, presided over one of the most prosperous periods in early English history. The political structures Alfred created, the buzz, the legal codes, the administrative systems, were refined and expanded by his descendants until they formed the skeleton of the English state. Alfred also shaped the way English kings understood their role. He wrote about kingship as a moral responsibility, not just a political one. He believed that a good king served God and his people, that leadership was not a privilege, but a duty. This idea, that power carried moral weight, that rulers were accountable not just to their subjects, but to a higher authority, became a defining thread in English political thought for centuries. Alfred died around 899 AD at approximately 51 years old. Given his chronic illness, his survival to that age was itself remarkable. He was buried in Winchester, the capital of Wessex, in the cathedral that his father had helped build. He left behind a kingdom that was, for the first time in a generation, secure. A kingdom with organized defenses, written laws, a functioning administration, and a growing intellectual culture. A kingdom that would, within a few generations, expand to encompass all of England. He left behind, in other words, the foundation of a nation. Let us return, at the end, to the image with which we began. A king in a swamp, barefoot, hunted, forgotten by the world that had once depended on him. Every rational calculation said he should have stayed hidden. Every practical consideration said the cause was lost. The Vikings controlled almost all of England. Wessex was broken, and Alfred, sick, exhausted, and alone, had every reason to surrender to the darkness. He didn't, and that, more than any single battle or treaty or law code, is what made Alfred the Great. We must be careful, as always, to separate the man from the myth. Medieval sources about Alfred were not written by neutral historians. They were written by scholars Alfred himself employed, men whose job was to present their king in the most favorable light possible. The famous story of the burnt cakes is almost certainly legend. Some of the details of Alfred's military campaigns may be exaggerated or simplified. The precise motivations behind his diplomatic decisions will never be fully known, but the core facts are indisputable. Alfred inherited a kingdom on the verge of extinction. He lost nearly everything. He rebuilt from nothing. He won the decisive battle that saved Saxon England. He negotiated a peace that reshaped the map of the country. He built a defensive system that protected his kingdom for generations. He reformed the law. He promoted education and literacy on a scale never before seen in England. And he did all of this while suffering from a chronic illness that would have given most men an excuse to do far less. Was Alfred truly the greatest English king? That is a question historians will debate for as long as there are historians to debate it. There have been kings who conquered more territory, kings who built greater monuments, kings who ruled longer and left deeper marks on the political map of Europe. But none of them did what Alfred did. None of them took a civilization on the brink of annihilation and not only saved it, but civilized it. None of them looked at the ashes of everything they had built and saw not an ending, but a beginning. Alfred the Great was not just a warrior. He was not just a diplomat. He was not just a scholar or a lawgiver or a builder. He was all of these things at once, at a moment in history when England desperately needed someone who could be all of them. He was, in the truest sense of the word, the architect of England. If this story changed how you see history, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more epic true stories. Every week, we dive deep into the lives of the people who shaped our world, the forgotten, the overlooked, and the extraordinary. And leave a comment below. Was Alfred truly the greatest English king? Or is there someone else you think deserves that title? We want to hear from you.